Well, let's get started then. So, got the agenda here. We have slides later with these titles, so I won't read it off, but these are and certainly feel free to stop me and ask questions at any time. I suspect during 55 minutes, I suspect there'll be time for just plenty of time for discussion, so don't hold questions till the end. All right, so we are currently going through the TST elections for 2025. Terms are for 2 years. The three people listed here were elected a year ago, and so we'll be continuing on for 2025. And then 2 slots are now up for election, and votes are due by the end of today. If you are eligible for voting, meaning you've gotten at least 2 approved and merged commits in 2024, you should have received an email explaining how to vote.
One note that the original email that I got at least said that it was due on December 18th. Though I then got a follow-up email a couple of days ago that said it's due today. So
Oh, is it due today, Michelle?
Let me look. That might be my fault. Let me check that.
I
Okay,
was also assuming December 18th, what is worth.
I went by the most recent email or one of the emails that I saw. Maybe I saw it wrong.
No, I have a second TST election going on right now as well, so I might have just gotten the timelines switched. Let me check that.
Okay. I'll go on while you're checking the final date. But anyway, elections are going on now. Vote early, vote often, but your vote only counts once, I think. Of course, several of you I saw at the P4 workshop on October 3rd, and there are recordings published now. Among many other things, Intel announced that they would be open sourcing the Tofino P4 compiler, which has already been done, but also driver and other software would be open source soon. I can say that Fabian Ruffy, I know, has been working with folks from Intel, and there's a private P4lang repo where that's being staged, and they're still working out last-minute changes and tweaks to get it to build. But once they get it to build and probably pass a few tests, they'll probably switch it to public. So keep an eye out for announcements of that. That will definitely deserve a blog article on p4.org and announcements in your, P4 announce probably, and Zulip closure, the P4 Zulip channel. So if you're on any of those, you should find out very quickly. There was also a P4 retreat held earlier in the week before the P4 workshop, and I've got more on that later. Some other interesting announcements that interest me. Feel free to add your own. Excite Labs announced X2, a programmable Ethernet switch, and Oxide published a plan to open source a P4 compiler for X2 at these links. So again, that will be, I'm sure, when it actually is open sourced, they'll be widely published among P4 community, so it should be easy to find once it's been published. Any other community updates folks want to add? Let's see. If you're not on the P4 Zulip forum, I recommend, the forum and is a like a web discussion forum. Zulip is more traditional chat. If you haven't checked out P4 Zulip, if you're the kind of person that wants to know about all GitHub pull requests and email and all the P4 email lists, all of them have their own, all the P4lang repos and all of the P4 email lists have an integration with Zulip so that they show up in their own separate channels there. So if you can follow all the P4lang repo issues and pull requests there if you wish. If you're looking for ideas for open source code developed, there's a newish repo about 2 months ago there that the issues are being used to track ideas for one of the impetus for this creation of this repo was Fabian and I were occasionally getting emails from people saying, hey, I've got some free time. I'd like to work on some P4 related stuff. Do you have ideas on what I could do? So we thought we'd just collect all these ideas in one place and point people there. So feel free to, obviously, to join in or participate in implementing some of those ideas. But also, even if you just have ideas for things you wish somebody else would do, you're welcome to publish them, create an issue there, if you like. So this is, I don't know if this is the first public TST meeting, but it's the first one I recall being public. And the plan is for most of them or all of them to be public in the future. So for folks that are new to this, you might wonder, what has the TST been doing behind their closed doors for so long? And the name technical steering team might be misleading almost, given the kinds of things we as I explained, we tend to talk about a lot of administrative things mostly. How do we, promote P4? What conferences and workshops should we participate in that we aren't already? Keeping communication channels open, keeping the mailing list running. Forum.p4.org, I think initiated as creation of that. I think initiated as an idea in the TST. Fabian Ruffy created the Zaloop instance in 2024. We nominate people to be chairs for the yearly P4 workshop. We nominate people to be co-chairs for work groups when positions become available. Google Summer of Code came up as a frequent topic of conversation during this year, and hopefully will next year as well, if we are able to again participate in Google Summer of Code next year. The also discussing, when the Open Network Foundation, when we P4 switched from being a sub project underneath the Open Networking Foundation, which when the Open Networking Foundation closed down, we switched over to be under the umbrella of Linux Foundation, and so the Open Networking Foundation contributor license agreement was no longer appropriate, and we had discussions and chose to replace it with I've forgotten what DCO stands for, but it's some developer certificate of origin, I believe, something used in the Linux kernel and some other projects. We thought it'd be a little more lightweight than the old contributor license agreement. So that's not everything that the TST has discussed, but I think it's a representative sample. You might be wondering, where are the technical discussions in all this? And the answer is they're in the already public P4 work group meetings. Language work group, architecture, API, education work group are pretty much where all the technical discussions occur. Yes, the folks on the TST know about and often participate in those things, but we tend not to have any long drawn out discussions in TST meetings that I recall on those issues. We tend to say that's something good to bring up the language work group next time, if it comes up at all. So if you're interested in influencing technical things, certainly, run for the technical steering team and join it. But more importantly, show up at one of the meetings or more of the meetings that you think are best appropriate for that, and advocate for ideas there. All right, so this is there were many things discussed at the P4 retreat. It was held 2 or 3, like the week before, the beginning of the week, that the like end of September, beginning of October. There were about 15 people attending, a day and a half of lots of discussions, breakout sessions on various topics. And part of our goal was to decide what should be the focus areas of P4 in the future. So some of the takeaways are, P4 and NPL from Broadcom continue to be used to program some Ethernet switches. I mentioned Broadcom Trident here. There's the other line I've forgotten, Tomahawk, that is not as much cheaper per port and not so programmable, highly configurable, but not, I wouldn't say programmable. But Broadcom Trident is their more expensive per port option that's more flexible. Cisco Silicon One is programmed heavily by Cisco engineers. Excite Labs X2 that I mentioned earlier is new and not selling in volume yet that I'm aware of, but probably in small volumes to sampling. Trident and Silicon One are pretty limited in who the companies selling them offer development environments to. You can't go as a university professor. I'm not aware of any cases of a university team going to Broadcom or Cisco, buying one and getting the access to the development environment. If that happens, that's a very special arrangement. That's not like a normal run-of-the-mill everyday thing occurrence. Even a medium-sized company getting access to the development is not a normal everyday occurrence either. there could be non-recurring engineering costs, one-time costs involved, and even for that, but typically for larger companies, it's easier. And it's not yet clear to me whether it will be possible to buy X2 in small quantities. One idea I wanted to toss out there was when X2 is purchasable in quantities of 1,000 or something like that, there might be an opportunity for some company or individual that wants to buy 1,000 of them and create boards and sell them one off to people if they want. With when there's an open source P4 compiler for it, development environment for it, that might become an attractive thing for a small company or consulting company to do if they think that might be profitable.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Nate.
Well, Ryan, you go first because you have actual knowledge of this situation, but yeah.
So, I mean, I'm from Oxide, so I can't speak directly for Excite Labs, but they have recently hired Eric Vallone, who's probably someone that's familiar to people that have been buying Tofino products in the past. And he's out there starting to engage with folks on what, a replacement for the Tofino could look like in terms of the X2. So I think they are starting to ramp up to look at how they can support the community in that way.
Nate?
The comment I was going to make just from the university professor perspective, a bunch of the funding agencies like to lower barriers for researchers who need access to infrastructure. So like if you've ever participated in a visioning workshop for the National Science Foundation, usually the program managers will encourage there to be one session that's devoted to test beds or infrastructure. And they'll fund these things. Now, they don't like to just sort of throw money at metal for no reason, but there's some precedent for example, Stanford in the early days of OpenFlow acquired a bunch of NEC OpenFlow switches and then basically, loaned them to a bunch of universities, and that helped get things going with SDN. So beyond some benevolent rich guy or rich woman or whatever buying a bunch of X2s and handing them out or reselling them, there may be a way for folks who are in research to band together and get a grant, and then
Okay.
Something in the future. I think it wouldn't be too hard.
I suspect that might be more likely with X2 than it would be with Silicon One or Broadcom Trident, perhaps. Is my guess, just a guess. Okay. So those things are ongoing. And folks, I believe the thing I didn't make a bullet point for because it's Tofino is no longer being offered for sale. You can buy used ones that people currently own if they offer them for sale, but there are no more new ones being produced now. So the focus areas that we came up with over this retreat were P4 and programmable SmartNIC data planes and using P4 to precisely specify and automatically validate existing behavior of network devices, whether they're programmable or not, even if they're not programmable. So I've got more to say on the following slides on these topics, but they are certainly not intended to be the last word, just some of the first ideas. So I solicited several vendors of SmartNICs for their brainstorming ideas of the kinds of things they'd like to see happen to help make their work with programmable NICs, to foster their work with programmable NICs and make them more flexible and useful. So one thing that's been discussed in the portable NIC architecture group several times, and going back 4 years, is the idea of there being a close to the Ethernet ports of the NIC, P4 programmable part that processes individual packets separately, just like an Ethernet switch would, or very much like an Ethernet switch would. But also having like a separate part that's quite a bit different in nature and character and hardware design that is closer to the host interface and has been called message processing. The idea being a message is perhaps something much, much larger than an MTU size packet of 9,000 bytes. For example, a 64 megabyte RDMA transfer would be a message here. So a host might say, send the 64 megabytes, here's the address and length. NIC, go off and do that. And yes, there are standards in RDMA for doing this with InfiniBand, but with AI ML work causing a blossom of work in this area, there's a lot of variations on ways you can do that. And having a programmable RDMA type transport is potentially a very useful thing for quickly adapting, for a single vendor to adapt to different ways of doing it, or for a customer who buys these things to experiment on their own and find out what works best. Going along with that would be supporting asynchronous events like timers firing or other events, exceptional events in the device, causing some message to be generated that you can write code that then reacts to that event of the timer firing. The P4 language, support for loops, a run to completion model, and other programming constructs. I'll just quickly mention the person that gave me this idea might not have known that loops are already added to P4C in May. That doesn't mean that the backends take advantage of it yet. That's up to each backend to decide.
And I think,
how to
I mean, we only added 4 loops, right? So for the run to completion model, we would actually need something more powerful.
The focus of the loops has definitely been on ones that could be proved to be a maximum number of iterations at compile time. But the current implementation does allow you to write C-style 3-clause for loops that are potentially infinite, and they will turn into those loops will be preserved in the IR to the back end, and it's up to the back end to decide whether to reject it or accept it and implement it. So you can actually write infinite loops in the source code, and P4C will preserve them to the back end. Stateful processing. So we've got add-on miss defined in the portable NIC architecture, where you can look up a key, and if it's not in there, the miss action can decide conditionally whether to add an entry with that key and some action and parameters or not. And then there's been discussions in the language group on read, modify, write, and ways to make that a little more syntax nice in action definitions. But maybe there's other things that could be added there. By the way, I'm kind of repeating, these are like bullet items I got from the vendors. I didn't get into a deep dive discussion with them on all these things. So this is highlights, not there are no any detailed discussions of these. We'll have to wait for future work group discussions. P4 runtime API support for stateful processing, queuing, and receive side scaling. That's the idea of sending different TCP flows or different flows to different CPU cores with different queues from the NIC to the host, and programmable ECP and hash or load balancing. Load balancing especially comes up in the AML use case quite a bit in different ways of doing that. So these are just a smattering of ideas for programmable NICs, and I'm sure there's more, but this is sort of just to give you a flavor of the kinds of things that some of the vendors are interested in. I'd like to collect more ideas from users of these, buyers of these things too, although in many cases they're keeping their ideas close to the vest. All right, this is my second to last slide. So this is just some ideas. One of the developers that's working on, so Microsoft has been promoting and using the Sonic operating system on their network switches for almost a decade now, I think, and use it quite widely in their network. The Dash project is the idea of adding some new Sonic APIs, SI APIs, for some new data plane behaviors that switches typically don't implement, like, for example, maintaining, add-on miss flow state for millions of TCP flows with fancy access control lists that decide whether the TCP flow or UDP flow should be allowed to be created at all. The flow state should be allowed at all. And the implementations of Microsoft created this project because they want vendors to go off and implement these APIs and create products that they can get to choose from 2 or maybe even more vendors with good implementations that have nice price power performance ratios in this feature set. And multiple vendors have been working on these implementations. Cisco and AMD have partnered for one such implementation. Excite Labs is working on theirs, and there's several other companies working on implementations, implementing the Dash APIs. So one of the developers at Microsoft they have a P4 program that is not intended to be compiled. It's intended to specify data plane behavior. So this is that's why the connection is to the using P4 to specify data plane behavior. They do compile it and run it on BMV2, but to my knowledge, they don't take it and compile it directly on any hardware targets today. But they do use it for document, executable specification of how they'd like their data plane to behave. And so he had a meeting with, I believe, so I got a list of these from sort of his feedback of using P4 for a while as a relatively new user earlier in the year, and what he wished he had to make his work easier for specifying this reference behavior. So he mentioned the paper by Nate and others on micro P4 as having some nice ideas that he'd like to see more of. I didn't get a detailed list of those, but some of those. He mentioned better modularization support for like allowing forward references between controls or allowing control definitions to be nested within each other. Supporting if statements within actions, and I didn't even know he had that request, but I knew it had been a gap for years and ended up implementing it in November without even knowing that he was interested in that, but that's now in BMV2 at least. Better support for assert in BMV2 specifically, showing more information when an assert fires, or if you're running the debugger, letting the debugger start interactively there and letting you poke around state at that point of execution. And supporting out of miss tables for BMV2. The BMV2 isn't exclusive here, it's just what the Dash folks have been using most often so far, so they notice the gaps in implementation and behavior there more so than others, perhaps. So these two slides are not intended to be, like I say, the first word, not the final word in these topics. I expect there to be a lot more ideas on both of these lists by a year from now, if not sooner. But this is sort of kicking off this forward plan here.
Could I maybe throw in, sorry, I didn't get to you offline. Could I throw in a few more thoughts on this one online, if that's okay?
Yeah.
So I think another set of features for specifying network devices is, if you look at our talk from the P4 workshop, when we say we use P4 as a specification language, we really mean two things. We mean as a specification language for the data plane behavior. And I think P4 is already great at that. But we also use it as a specification language for the control plane API. Sort of implicitly today, if you have your P4 program, you define a bunch of tables, and then if you use something like P4 runtime, it says for each of these tables, you have a certain control plane API and a certain schema for how you can program that table. So implicitly, a P4 program defines a control plane API, but it is quite implicit. And we have sometimes wanted more control, more features for specifying properties of the control plane API. For example, the work on P4 constraint with Nate is basically that, right? We're constraining the control plane API. And internally, we have introduced a few other mechanisms. And so generally, I think in that space, like, can P4 also say more about the control plane API? I think there's opportunities and open problems there.
Good, thanks for sharing. And I encourage you to, create issues in your working group if you are willing to publish them. Let me think. Looks like we're about halfway through our time here, so let me just flash up my last slide at least. But we can. These are some. So this is the kind of thing the TST maybe more traditionally discusses rather than my earlier slides. But these are a list of events coming up in 2025 that P4.org might want to participate in. I doubt we have, let's say, the people. It'd be great if we had the people interested in, participating in all of these things, but I suspect it might be we might be more selective than that. The P4 workshop we don't have a date selected yet. It's traditionally been in April or May in the past, but given it was so late last year because of the transition from Linux Foundation delaying things, we might not want to go. It's an open question whether we want to shoot for April or May or some later month. Euro P4 is something that actually has been organized kind of independently of P4.org, other people doing that, but that's something we'd like to publicize, certainly. There's a lot of Linux, the LF are all Linux Foundation events, LF event, and OCP is the Open Compute platform. And I believe Michelle compiled this list of events from primarily OCP and LF that we may want to consider participating in. So we don't necessarily need to discuss this in detail today unless folks have ideas of things. But in general, I think the earlier it is, the more likely we want to talk about it sooner. The ones that happen next December, we might not need to rush to decide whether to participate in that or not. But the one in March or in particularly maybe the one in the Open Source Summit North America in June in Denver, sounds like they're soliciting proposals now, and it might fill up quickly, I've heard.
So
anyway.
yeah, if you don't mind me jumping in here, Andy,
Yeah, please.
this is obviously kind of just a list of events that LF and OCP host that might be of interest. If anyone is aware of any other events that you think would be helpful for P4 to consider participating in, please let us know. Specifically, the Open Source Summit North America in June in Denver and the one in Europe in August have an opportunity for P4 to host a half-day mini summit at no cost. You do have to purchase a pass to the summit itself in order to get access to the workshop. So it wouldn't be like a separate registration. It would be a mini summit within the context of the bigger summit. But all the logistics and coffee and tea and everything and room and AV, all that would be provided. The project would need to have someone kind of own it, pull in enough speakers for a 3.5 hour time slot. But essentially it's an opportunity for P4 to take advantage of a bigger audience at a bigger event at very little cost. So because that Denver one is coming up soon and because they did say that there are limited slots for these mini summits, if it is something the project wants to do, we would probably need to submit a proposal within like the next week, I would say, to take advantage of that. So it's something for this group to consider.
A
I think
couple
it's the only
quick
time
questions-
sensitive one that's on there right now.
a couple quick questions about that event in particular, as I'm not familiar with it and haven't participated before. So you
Mhm.
said it's basically 3.5 hours of time available that ideally you would fill with useful discussions and talks, probably presentations. And so that's probably multiple speakers, most likely. It would be better than one person talking for 3.5 hours. And
Unless you feel really loquacious.
yeah, uh, I can talk. I don't know whether I can talk interestingly for that long.
We're gonna start reading Ulysses or something, or the phone book.
To do a
It doesn't have to
filibuster.
be presentations the whole time. If you get a room, you get AV and you get a
Right.
dedicated time frame. So if you want to
Right.
do almost
Discussion.
like a mini tutorial session for part of that, or do more of a like brainstorming,
Sure.
networking piece, I mean, it's really up to what you think the best use of that time would be.
And that's
The
a
time slot they're
I'm
in-person
not sure
live
we're trying to
not
filibuster here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's in person live, not virtual.
It's in person. I believe there's recording options, but it wouldn't, live streaming would cost extra.
Nate?
Yeah, so the governing board, which is the other body that sits above the TST, if you like, and really controls the purse strings for the project, also discussed this yesterday. And I think, procedurally, the TST, makes decisions about what happens with the project in terms of what we do. But, in as much as having events also touches on funding, the governing board is also involved. Anyways, I think the governing board is happy to support if there are, people or groups who wanted to put together another event, maybe piggybacking on one of these larger industrial events. I can just share, I mean, this is not meant to be a directive or a decision, but when we looked at these events, it's really attractive when there's something in the Bay Area, just given how many of, I would say us, but I'm not there. How many of you are already in the Bay Area or have, good reason to go visit the mothership of your company in the Bay Area? And you can just be pretty confident that you'll get, interested people who are in the community or adjacent to come. It seems riskier to have an event, for at least for our kind of core constituency, in another place, because you might start to just wonder if you'll sort of have critical mass for a meeting, even if it's kind of low stakes. Now, there is a opportunity if there are people in these larger, there will be people in these larger events. So I think there's an opportunity to have visibility and maybe to pull in some people who might be, in the Kubernetes community or somewhere else. But that's a bit, that's sort of hoping and dreaming. I don't like know for sure how many such people would show up and what they would be interested in such. So I would be interested to hear, actually, I think Stefan gave a talk at one of these LF events last year, and maybe just some sense of like, do you think there would be synergies? Would if we had a P4 half day, would there be people who are actually interested, and would that be worth it? And then the last thing I'll just say before letting Stefan respond is, I think our plan on the governing board, which seemed to make sense, was, so we'll definitely support these top 4 events. So the Euro, the 2 Asia events that run with interest group there, and then the P4 workshop. These are must-haves, and we'll make them happen. We're thinking that the P4 workshop would probably be later in the year for the reasons that Andy said. If there is interest, and maybe some of the P4 people who are based in Europe, if there was interest in doing one of these piggyback onto one of the LF events, then let's do it. But we're not holding our breath that would happen. And it might be that it's too soon and maybe too risky, or hard to be sure we'll have a viable event. But we thought we'd just explore it and see if there was, I don't know, on this call, I don't know, is anyone here based in Europe? Davida, are you in Europe, or are you in the US? I don't know where you're actually based.
I'm in Europe.
Yeah. So there are a bunch of P4 folks in Europe, and to finish the task, we should reach out to more of them, and not just who showed up in the evening at this meeting. But yeah, as a default plan, that's kind of what the governing board was thinking. But this is not, again, not meant to be normative.
So, for example, the June Denver event could perhaps better be considered from P4.org's perspective, kind of an outreach, publicity, try to generate interest in P4 event rather than, P4 folks talking to P4 folks necessarily. So if there were talks or tutorials or demonstrations of systems or features that might be more interesting for that event than the kind of things we do at the P4 workshop. Is something I was thinking might be more useful than giving a deep dive talk on the innards of P4.
Hey, Andy, just another thought, seeing that OCP Global Summit is in October and in San Jose area. Question is, do we move P4 workshops so it's adjacent to that, so people traveling to that might, it could be adjacent days or something, that save on travel costs. Just a thought, because the timing is a year after then our one this year.
Yeah, so that agrees with what the governing board had discussed. And I've already reached out to OCP leadership, who actually a bunch of us know, just to start a conversation. I didn't want to, we have no commitment. We could of course just do something that's aligned date-wise with them, but independent.
Right.
But we might also consider doing something more tightly coupled to OCP, which, many of the companies involved with P4 also are very active in OCP, and that's a pretty nice event. But that's all TBD. So.
And the Sonic folks tend to have some workshops there as well. So it could be cool
That's
if we could get some of the people working on Sonic, also to the P4 workshop.
That was exactly what I think. Yeah.
That's a good point. And also, the Sonic Workshop has, let's say, a little easier bar to enter if you know the right people and your topic's relevant. Getting into the OCP Global General Agenda, they're pretty discriminating. You're competing with a lot of exciting hardware talks that people want to talk about, and P4 doesn't always make the cut, but the Sonic Workshop is more likely to be allied with that, I think, from past experience.
I think part of what I'm discussing, Chris, is maybe like having a separate, affiliated workshop on the same days, or maybe near time days that are,
or getting a slot, try to get a large part of a day based around P4. And also the Sonic Dash connection is going to be your ally for that. You're going to have those people boosting it from within Microsoft, whereas OCP, you got the whole world, and you're competing with every possible OCP topic,
So
and they win or without.
my swing for the fences approach, which of course we might not hit, would be try to get something in OCP proper, and then have a co-located event, probably distinct from the Sonic Workshop, but a co-located event that is, for some sense, marketed under the OCP umbrella, the OCP Summit umbrella, but is its own event. And then if there were further tie-ins with the Sonic Workshop, that's gravy. Now, that may be too much to ask, but you know,
Are you thinking on those 14th, 15th, 16th days, or just before or just after, or?
no, probably our event, I'm assuming, I don't know how to speed run things, so I should actually just shut up. But I was assuming that what Chris says is right, that it would be very hard to penetrate those 3 days, unless maybe we can get, one talk somewhere in the circus that is OCP Global Summit, which would be great. But the P4 workshop proper would probably have to be on a day adjacent. And, again, I don't know how they organize things, may or may not be at the same venue, but if we can at least bundle with them in some sense, that would be a positive, right?
They also have kind of warm-up days for OCP that are like workshops. Right? They've had hackathons, they've done this and that. That's kind of before the main event, like a day, usually a day before, or maybe 2 days before, and that's also a possible venue. And even if you do a separate P4 workshop co-located on a different day, that doesn't mean we shouldn't also try to get at least one talk in the Sonic workshop, maybe in partnership with some of the Microsoft people who are in the Dash project, because they'll be very enthusiastic to work on that, I think. So it doesn't mean it can just be one. We can try all three.
Yeah, general OCP Sonic workshop and separate one-day event or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. I generally like these ideas of trying to build some bridges here. I think this is great. I have a few words of caution also, because I've been to these events. I mean, there's also some cultural differences that could create some challenges if we or some friction. Maybe let me say it this way. So, for example, I'll just name a few things. Like, I think the P4 workshop still has kind of an academic touch, whereas some of these events are sort of very far on the other side of the spectrum. Some of them. So where it's more about sales and business. Some concrete things that I've run into is, for example, I gave a talk at a Sonic workshop, and I was like, there was light shining on me, and it was impossible to see the audience, and I was sweating, and so I don't know if you want that kind of thing at a P4 workshop. I don't quite understand why that is necessary, to be honest. Another problem I had was just signing up for a spot, because the terminology they use, they have very specific formats with no explanation of what they mean for their talks. And it's hard to Google them, honestly, find out what they mean by these formats. So it's kind of a bit, how do I say? It didn't feel very inclusive in that sense. And yeah, so there might be a little bit for people coming from an academic setting, even myself coming by now from an industrial setting, the entrance was a bit difficult. So that would be a few words of caution, but I think we can. I think this is generally a very good idea. I just we need to also be aware that there's some complexities like that.
If you get the right champion, you need a champion at Microsoft,
or an OCP coach.
Yeah, a champion at Microsoft who's connected to this project, goes all the way up the chain to the deciders, and it's not that hard to get through to them, I don't think. But we can talk about that if you take that route.
So it sounds like there's much more enthusiasm for partnering up with OCP, or at least exploring what that would look like, than there is in like kind of doing a half-day mini summit at one of these LF events, because it seems like there's maybe not the best alignment, and it's a little more of an unknown being, and it's not geographically really convenient this year. Does that sound about right?
I mean, I still want to explore the Europe thing. Maybe I misunderstood. Is the Open Networking and Edge Summit, the formerly One Summit in London, is that also one of the events that we could tack onto for low cost?
It wouldn't be free, but we could see what it would cost to do a mini summit with that.
Okay.
So just the open source summits are the ones offering the free half-day ones right now.
So, I mean, speaking just as a participant in this meeting, not even a TST member, I personally don't understand the value of sort of the open source summits in a place that doesn't have a concentration of people already, but you know, happy to be overruled if someone has different evidence or different information.
You get to go to London, man.
No, but London we have to pay for is the point. I mean, there's the budget thing we can leave out, but the sort of very low cost or free offers are the open source summits in Denver, Amsterdam, or I guess that's it, or maybe March.
Japan, I think the bottom one.
Was the Napa one also included there? The member summit? I'm not quite sure.
The member summit is its own weird animal. It's more of a networking event, so you don't have booths or talks per se, but it's more of a chance for like project stakeholders to come together. Like a lot of project boards have in-person meetings there once a year to have a chance to get together and then network with some of the other folks from different project boards or executive director. It's a little bit more of a schmoozing event, and is my granted I've never been, so take what I say with a grain of salt, but it sounds to me like it's better leveraged as a networking event for board members and executive directors and kind of higher level broad vision folks than it is more digging into the technical details of projects.
Yeah. Okay. So just to try to re-summarize, I mean, yeah, I think it sounds like there's some enthusiasm for exploring tie-ins, especially with Sonic, and that aligns us with OCP and also lands us in California and also lands us at the right time of year. And I guess perhaps we'll speculatively explore some of these other ideas, but I would say don't hold your breath because it's not clear that we'll have someone who wants to organize them and they might cost money and maybe they're not, you know, again, I'm not trying to snuff out anyone's enthusiasm, but it just, until we have some other evidence to the contrary, it doesn't seem to quite add up.
I mean, for example, if somebody came to you with a proposal saying, "I'd like to go to Denver in June,"
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
and fill 3.5 hours, and we're maybe asking for travel grants or maybe not even that, and then that would be an easier thing for the board to approve.
I think if there were member driven, you know, someone with sort of standing in the community said, I would love to do this. I think we would be very receptive to such a message. Because I do think, I mean, my sort of pragmatic skepticism notwithstanding, it would be good for us to be more visible. Even if there's some culture mismatch, as Stefan said, I think, you know, if it's worth it, if someone thinks it's worth it for them to go to one of the, to get something together and go to one of these meetings, that there's no bad publicity here. And I think, and again, maybe there's some technical things and community things that come out too. So in no way trying to snuff out anyone's enthusiasm for doing something. I just, until someone actually sends that message to us, you know, I'm trying to be realistic about what the people, like, there's a bunch of us who basically will commit to making these events happen. But it takes a lot of time and energy. So just trying to focus those people, you know, people like Andy who chaired last year's meeting, or I'm sure there's others who have helped out with other events, you know, want to be realistic about what that group can do.
Yeah.
So except for the OCP Global Summit, is there like a second most likely one that seems worth paying attention to? Maybe the London one or the Denver one?
I
any
personally thought, yeah, those two stand out. I mean, I guess the London one stands out because topically it seems to have, it's the LF's networking event. I believe that's sort of the LF networking sort of flagship, you know, conference. So just in terms of topic, that one's closest. And then I think Denver, just for, you know, Denver's a pretty easy place to get, and the timing seems good. That's not to be too US geographically focused. Again, Amsterdam and Japan also sound good, but you know, I'm not going to be traveling to Japan. Sorry.
Yeah, makes sense.
A suggestion for Europe, but it's late and I never been, is FOSDEM. It's done in Brussels from the, I think, University of Brussels, and it's fully open source oriented. You can submit, from my understanding, because I did um, I mean, I checked in the structure of the conference, but I never been there. It's fully open source, so you can present paper or workshop or whatever you want for free. I think that the booths are going to pay the space for the booths, and could be doable for let's say step in a bit in Europe as a first step. But it's going to be in February, so, and I think that have already closed the submission.
Yeah, that does seem
But,
to be, I mean, the holidays are already upon us, so I feel like that's probably too soon to even
no. I mean, just to add,
for the
I mean,
future.
to add it to for the future, of course. I mean,
Yeah.
because I understand that for Europe, I mean, it's very challenging, and so might be, if you are interested to do something in Europe, maybe bonding a bit with the guys that doing Europe before to present something at FOSDEM could be doable, because maybe there are some connection, because it's a mix among universities or open source no, sorry, kind of state company, like the one that manage the network of university and things like that. They are going there, so.
Yeah, it looks like the CFP deadline has passed. If you know of anyone who's going to attend, it would be great to get some feedback, and we can plan on adding it to the calendar for 2026 and being, ahead of the CFP deadline. It also looks like they offer like BOFs and lightning talks, so that might also be an easy opportunity to have someone attend and just get more visibility for P4 who's already planning on attending, or if we want to sponsor someone to go. I feel like I've had another project do this and enjoyed it. I'll have to find out.
Yeah, I've heard good things about FOSDEM. I've just never been myself.
Mm-hmm.
I'm planning to go this year, but I'm not 100% sure. But I can give you a feedback if I go there, and let's see. I think it's also open, free access for everyone. So
Okay.
I'll
Yep.
let
Yeah,
you know.
please do. That would
Yeah,
be great
please do
to
let
find
us know
out.
how it went if you go. So that's my last slide. And glad we got some good discussion on these opportunities. If you are interested in one of these other events, like I said, yeah, it sounds like the governing board is definitely open to helping support, and I would definitely help support. I've thought about it a little bit, and I don't think I have a strong impetus to like try to find 2 or 3 other people to go to Denver in June to organize an event and some talks there. But if I don't know, if I have some inspiration and a dream on a series of 3 talks to give there, I'll let you know.
Okay.
Any other, I guess, yeah, we're almost up to the top of the hour. My understanding is so the TST probably the next we've been meeting monthly this year. Probably the plan is to continue to meet monthly, and most or all of them will be public in 2025. So the next one will probably be probably more like second week of January rather than first, just to allow people who are on extended leaves and breaks to have time to come back before the meeting. So look for an announcement of probably a second week of January, sometime next meeting, occurrence of this meeting, and that will be public as well. Any other topics folks want to raise? And I will fix. I saw Michelle, you said that the corrected date for the last day of voting is December 18th. I will fix these slides. I have not published these slides to the world yet. I guess I should just send them to you, Denise, or Michelle, to have them published as part of the meeting notes.
So this meeting has been recorded, so we'll post this on the YouTube so folks who missed it or want to check can see it. I also took notes that cover most of what's on the slides, but you can
Great.
send them to us so that we have them just in case. We need to figure out, I don't know, maybe the best place to keep them, that they would
Sure.
be publicly accessible.
So Andy,
Great.
if we do this end of year blog that I sent you and Nate a note about, maybe we include a link to the recording of this meeting. So I think there's a
Okay.
lot of good things people will care about.
Great. Anything else? Any closing words? Anything else you'd like to add today?
I mean, for folks who are not in the TST, I'd love to hear any reactions to the sort of project status that Andy presented, or the retreat reflections, or we spent a lot of time talking about events, but anything that's been on your chest that you want to share with the TST?
Yeah, I do actually. This is Hari. So do we know if there is a commitment from, and I did notice that they released the backend for their compiler, but they did not release the model, the register accurate model. So from Fabian, I would like to understand if there was any deadline that they were marching towards, any possibility that we could ask them to present their plans to the P4 workshop.
I don't know if Fabian's here, but I can give I've been watching this
He's
closely.
here. He's here.
So,
Yes, I am here.
oh, good. Do you want to give a
Yeah.
status? Or should I?
Well, I mean, I can just give the things I know. So from what I know, that the commitment is they will open source the studio, so the surrounding parts, but the model code, it will be a binary they provide. So it's not the source code. I also heard about P4 Insight is currently not available. So these two things are missing. I don't know whether they're going to open source that in the future. I mean, I haven't requested it or asked for it. But the broader P4 Studio code will be open sourced, yeah.
I see. So we would have examples of P4 that compile against the Tofino model. And there were a few externs that they had. I was wondering if there were any plans to add add, or
I mean they'll have the support of those externs in Tofino native architecture as part of the P4C backend.
I see.
Whether or not those externs are added any other backend is up to those backends to do.
Okay, fair. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, the main constraint is that I think the model will be frozen in time. So whatever the model supports.
I see.
Unless they later choose to release open source of the model, which is unclear.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
But
so
yeah.
I mean, we have a product built around Tofino. Once this becomes open source, we'll be open sourcing all of our infrastructure around the Tofino. One thing that is definitely challenging about this, that I've been harping on Intel for a very long time about, even before the talks of open source was being mentioned, was that yes, the compiler is open source. Yes, some of the backends being open source. I guess the model is not being open sourced, which is going to make things challenging. And there's no microarchitectural documentation, so that turns the back end of the compiler into a lot of guesswork for people that would want to be participating there. So at the end of the day, this is all a little vacuous, which is extremely disappointing.
I mean, the thing that would make it even possible, not easy, very time consuming, but possible, would be if they released like hardware specs and the source code of the model. But there's no plan to open those that I'm aware of. Even with those released, you're talking somebody who wants to do this full time for years to experienced edit, I think.
Yes, that I agree.
Yeah, I mean, for us, like from my perspective, which is, definitely specific to Oxide, but, we have systems that are going to be running Tofino in market for the next 10 years. We just spent an enormous amount of money on last time buy for Tofinos. And so we have a vested interest in supporting these and supporting the compiler and doing things out in the open. But if there's no open model, if there's no microarchitectural documentation, that really ties our hands quite a bit.
And sorry, I didn't quite understand what Fabian said. So there's a clear no to open sourcing the model?
No, there's a not a clear no. It's vague in the sense of they just told me or well, Andy that they're just gonna give us a binary for now.
I mean,
But we
that's what's in
didn't.
the current private repo. There's no
Yeah.
explicit plan to say, and the model will be coming in the next release. There's no explicit
Yes.
plan that way.
Yeah, and I mean, but considering I asked about P4 Insight, it was somewhat clear that there might have been a plan just to not give out the source code, but if you push them, it could be possible that it's
I
open
mean,
source.
as I understand it, the model is really a blocker because let me just put myself in Ryan's shoes or Oxide shoes. So you've just made this huge capital purchase. You're happy
Yeah.
to take on the immense engineering to continue evolving the compiler, but without a software model, I mean, the only way you can run these things is on some binary that becomes outdated in a week or
Yes.
the actual hardware. And
I mean, not outdated, just static.
Yeah, but
it should still work the way it does when they release it. Just never change
yeah, no,
after.
it's just
yeah,
less friction. And yeah,
it's frozen for Tofino 1 and 2 how that
No,
particular switch works.
but,
Yeah.
but you may not realize compiler choices because depends on what the model outputs, right? If the model tells you where the placement of certain things were, then you could theoretically at least improve your compiler. If you don't know that, then
Yep.
Yeah,
so
that's the crux of the problem.
Since no one from Intel's here and none of us, some of us worked in Intel but don't anymore, it sounds like it'd be useful for the P4 community to pose the question at an appropriate level to try to push the issue. So
yes.
Andy, I don't know if you should do that or I should do that, but let's talk offline and one of us should do that because I think this seems, yeah, at a technical level, it's wonderful to have open source contributions, but like if there's a N% more that would make the contribution more valuable for the community, let's advocate for that.
Sure.
And
yeah,
the people thing, I feel I hear less strongly. I mean, of course, it'd be great to have other tools, but that does seem like a kind of, I don't know, separable thing and more of a nice to have than a.
I mean, P4 Insight, if you're trying to compile code for Tofino, is almost essential, in my view, for fitting things. But that's not part of the deal right now.
Yeah, I mean, this was just an ad because, well, yeah, there were students that tried to use it and it was not available in the same way the studio. Well, it's not part of the studio currently. That's it, really. Unclear why.
Okay, yeah, Andy, let's talk offline and one of us.
Yeah, so I suspect Deb Chatterjee for now is the right person into Intel, and some combination of you, me, and maybe even Ryan from a industrial perspective might be the best people to ask.
Yeah, sounds good.
Thank you.
Well, we're a little bit over time. Thanks for joining, folks, and hope to see you next month.
Bye.